The image of the servant is an image that's a whole lot harder to cope with, really, because um, it is so countercultural to everything we do. I know in Christian circles and in leadership circles we talk about servant leaders, and we've made this idea of this concept of servant leader as a way that a leader leads. But really, in many languages and many cultures, and I really believe in the time of Jesus, to put a leader and a servant in the same sentence just doesn't fit. One is completely different to the other, and you can't be the both at the same time. And Jesus did this. He put this shocking image into play because he wanted to show just how powerful it is to be a leader or a servant that leads. The image starts way in the Old Testament, where those that God puts into position are often considered his servants. And even the good ones and the bad ones, God uses as his servants. He asks them to do what he set them forward to do. But the image takes full prophecy in Isaiah, in what we call the songs of Isaiah, the servant songs, where the prophecy of Jesus Christ, of the Messiah, is made. And when Jesus comes, he fulfills this role of God's servant and a servant to others. There's this amazing little series of events that happen in the scriptures. Jesus is near the end of his earthly ministry, and he's walking towards Jerusalem with his band of disciples, and he knows he's going to certain death on the cross. And he's told his disciples, well, they misunderstand a little bit, and they start bickering who's going to be the most important in Christ's kingdom. And so he pulls them aside and he gives them a teaching. And he says to them, in the world, those who have authority and those who have position lord it over others, and they exercise their authority and they control them. He says, but you know what? In my kingdom, that's not the way it's going to be. If you want to lead in God's kingdom, you need to be a servant. And he uses even the word slave. Well, the disciples don't really get it. And so they get into Jerusalem, and at the Last Supper, at the Passover feast that they have together, Jesus gets up and he takes off his rabbinical clothing as the leader, and he puts on the clothing of a menial servant, and he does this menial task of washing the dirty feet of the disciples. One of the translations says, Jesus showed the full extent of his love. Well, washing their feet was a demonstration of that, and he used it to say to the disciples, you should do what I've done. You've seen me do this, copy me, is basically what he says. But you know what? He washed dust from their feet. A few hours later, he goes to the cross, and he washes your sin and my sin off our souls with his blood. And that really is the servant thing, that is, he completely sacrifices himself. Well, Paul comes and explains this for us a little bit later in the letter to the Philippians in chapter 2. He says, Jesus, who by very nature was God, didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he humbled himself. He made himself small to be like a human being, and even smaller, like a criminal who dies a criminal's death. And that humility, that making himself small, that servant role that he does for us, is the image that he leaves us for the leader. Well, that doesn't look like the average leader around the world, where the leader's role then is to sacrifice himself for those that he leads. But this humble servant is what God calls us to be if he's going to entrust us with leadership in his kingdom. Not to serve ourselves, but to serve both God and to serve those that we lead.